taking no. We ain't taking no. We ain't taking no. Saints breaking out of cells. Go, 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 go. The battle's been won. He said it's done. So we ain't taking no L's. We ain't taking no L's.
If you remember last week, a guy named Lorenzo in Italy, Kyle and Lauren were telling me that he had a follow-up with him. He invited him to team time. If you remember that whole story that Lorenzo's like, I need a Caillou. And Caillou came into his life, got to share the gospel with him, had a 2-hour meal, and then followed up again with a 5-hour conversation. And a couple other guys got to join in on that. But just a little bit of an update on that. Lorenzo comes to team time. They're doing normal worship and prayer that you guys are used to. And the cool thing is they broke up into small groups, and one of the things that they were praying for is that the seeds, all the seeds that were planted in Italy, would be watered, and then they would see the harvest, and then weeks and months to come, so that Dario could have more people in his church. And Lorenzo was just saying, he starts crying, he starts tearing up, and he's like, man, I am so unworthy. Like I'm so thankful for Caillou for inviting me, but God is just. If he were to throw me to hell, he'd be just. And he just goes on and talk about, like, I'm not even worthy for God to answer my prayers or to even listen to me. And so I guess Caillou was saying, he's like, he just went into this prayer and basically repented of his sins, and they got to lead him to Jesus. And it's just so cool to see how inviting people into the presence of God and just the family of God, and how it just works on a person's heart and on their soul. And God graciously opened this man's heart, and he got saved. And just pray that the work of the Holy Spirit would begin in his life, and that he would be a disciple of Jesus and make disciples. As you guys know, that there's only a few days left in Japan, and we're seeing the harvest come. You know, I'm just amazed at how many unreached people that we've met. I'm reminded when Jesse and Amy, they just met a Korean girl. They got to share the gospel with her, and this girl's like, I've never heard that. I've never actually heard that message before. And so they got to pray for her, and they said, well, what do you think? And she's like, well, I'm not necessarily sure I believe, but I'm starting to. And so pray that as she goes back home to Korea, that she would be saved, and that seed would be watered, and that God would bring the harvest. Christian Bravo is also meeting up with a barista at Blue Bottle. A lot of you guys are familiar with that place. And again, with a guy that has never heard the gospel. It's just amazing to me. I know that no matter where we go in the world, whether it's Europe or South America or Central America or Africa, wherever we go in the world, there's always going to be a need for people to hear the gospel. But it is unique, and it is a privilege to speak to people who have never heard the name of Jesus or this gospel. And so thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you for all that you guys are doing, all the generous giving. It really is making a difference that we get to be in an unreached nation and actually see a harvest come in. It's amazing to see how our people are following up with other guys. It was Toby and Greg Zebach. They met a guy on a bus, and they just started talking about things of life and building relationship. And then they said, hey, do you want to follow up? And so they got to go to a restaurant. They actually got kicked out of this restaurant for whatever reason. And then their resilience, their persistence, they're like, hey, let's go meet at this coffee shop right across the way. So they opened up their Bible, started sharing with him, because I don't think they did this on the bus. And so as they opened up the Bible, the guy's like, are you guys Christians? And they're like, yeah. And so they started sharing this story, and he's like, wait, pause. This guy, my friend, he's actually sharing the exact same story. So pray that this guy, this Chinese man who's visiting in Japan, he'd be saved, and that this, again, guys, as I'm speaking, I'm hoping you guys are praying for these people, because our prayers are effective and God answers. Kiana met a girl from Hong Kong and invited her to platform, then also invited her to church on Sunday. And I actually got to meet her, and it was really cool. At the end, when Naoki always gives a gospel call, and as he did, he explained the gospel in depth. And one of the things he did was he said, okay, if you are listening to this message and you feel the tug on your heart, to stand up and receive Jesus. And so this woman from Hong Kong stood up. And I have a point to this at the end, but I want to just say this, that she did stand up. She did give her life to Jesus. Kiana then followed up with her, and I think she was like, man, I want this Jesus, you guys have modeled love and you modeled serving one another, and I can just even see it here in the church. But she's like, maybe Jesus, maybe Jesus. And she had been saying this even before church. And one of the things that it struck me as I was thinking about watching this in America, and then also watching this in Japan, as people stand up and they give their life to the Lord. I'm preaching this Sunday. You guys can be praying for that the message would actually resonate in the people's hearts at HBC, specifically their people. I'm preaching on Matthew 13, a very famous passage, the parable of the sower. And one of the things we're believing is that HBC would be a fourth soil church. It's, people hear the gospel all the time and they may even accept, but we know that the first one, the seed is taken by Satan or the bird, right? And it's snatched. And so people hear it and then they quickly forget as soon as they leave. The second one is that when trials and tribulation come in and they're like, man, I don't know if I like this anymore. I don't know if I necessarily want to follow Jesus. Life is getting really difficult because I gave my life to the Lord. And so they fall away. And then the third one is the riches. Life is really good. Life is not just bad and they fall away, but life is really good. And the thorns just choke out this life that they accepted a long time ago, and then they stopped following the Lord. But what we're believing for is that fourth soil, that the gospel would land on this fourth soil heart and produce fruit. And it said it's 3 different kinds of fruits, right? If you remember, it was 30, 60, 100 fruit fold. And we're believing that I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if it's a 30-fold church or a 60-fold, just that HBC would be fruitful and they would accept the gospel and they would be lifelong followers of Jesus. Caleb and Matthew Crespo saw a guy as they were leaving the subway. They approached a guy and said, hey, would you mind coming to church on Sunday morning? And so they struck up a conversation, talked about the Lord. He ended up coming. They ended up having breakfast in the morning before church. I got to meet the guy too as well and introduce him to some of the new leaders there at HBC. And he seemed to enjoy it. And then they've invited him. They said, hey, we're having a 4th of July party. And Jeff, of course, this is pretty funny, right? I mean, this Japanese guy trying to get to know the Lord, getting to know us, joins us at a 4th of July party where we're singing the national anthem, we're eating burgers and fries. It's a lot of fun. And it looked like he had a smile on his face. I got to see him. And so just be praying that this man gets to know the Lord and becomes a disciple of Jesus and becomes a part of HBC. I want to share a little church update with a couple of the members of HBC that I thought was worth sharing with you guys. One, Yumi and Yuto, they're the new couple. Yumi got saved and baptized just last week, and she was Corey and Paula's neighbor for about a month because she was a foreign exchange student and got to spend a little time in Orlando. But this couple who's come to help be managers of the cafe and work full time there, one of the things that Nicole and I were praying for them, and right after we prayed for Yuto and Yumi, Yuto turns around and says, thank you so much for praying for us. In his words, he says, I have been called here to fight the spiritual battle. And so please be praying. He recognizes it's a spiritual battle. They're from Tokyo. He's a 5th generation Christian, but specifically wanted to come to Kyoto because he knows the battle is intense here. And so he's praying that this church would thrive over the years. And so he wants to be a part of that. The second thing I want to share is Kisea. As I was walking home, he's the guy from Zambia, and Mike and him got to spend a little time together, which is kind of cool. They got to do some discipleship together with a guy that they met and did a lot of follow-up. And I'm not going to go into all that story, but Kisea on the way home from one of our meetings, I think it was the Unite night from Coco Cob, we were walking back. I was like, hey, what did you learn? He's like, man, I'm really sad. I knew you guys are leaving in about a week. And man, I really got connected. I made friends. And he started going through the list of people in our church just by name. He's like, oh, and they're right over there. And because we walked past them, and he's like, man, you guys are so amazing. And I said, what makes us amazing? What is it that you love about us? And he just said, one of the things in Isaiah 55 you talked about, I've heard one of the messages that you guys are sent out in joy and peace. He's like, I do sense that. And it is true. But he's like, the one thing that marks you guys is love. And I was telling Mike Pabone that, and he's just like, man, that's it, right? We want to be known for our love. That's exactly what Jesus said. And so it's amazing to see that God has produced this. I remember just even this spring, we're doing the 1 Corinthians 13 series on love and be a loving church. And so way to go, guys, with that. It's awesome. One other story too, there was 5 new people and 5 HPC people. So there's 10 people plus our guys at Platform this week. and Wednesday, or I think it was Friday. And one of the things that, I mentioned Erica, she's been at the church for about 6 years. She was there when we were there in 2019, along with Kasea. And one of the things she said, she's like, man, I love how you guys do this post move. And she's like, I think I want to do a post move. I think I want to be a part of that. And so one of the things she did, she's like, I'm going to clean up my apartment. It's a tiny little apartment, but I'm going to clean it up so that after life group or after platform, we can all gather there. And she did it. And she's like, this is awesome. I want to continue to do this well after you guys leave. So way to go, guys. Also got some really good news, guys, that Phil and Jade, they got their 3-year visa, which is amazing. They could either get 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years. So they got 3 years. So praise the Lord. We believe that God providentially opened up that door for them this week because we're all supposed to go to Southeast Asia for some meetings. And so they got it in the nick of time. So thankful for that. And one of the cool things that Naoki said about this is that one of the things he really appreciates about them versus these other missionaries who come is those guys, a lot of these guys are coming from different parts of the world that come in and they'll maybe be a missionary there for about a year or half a year or maybe a little longer, but they're self-appointed. And one of the things he said about our guys is like, I love that you guys vet your missionaries and we're the ones who ask for help and you brought them. And so, and what that shows is that they're building relationship, and it thrills my heart to see Naoki-san and Hiroko-san open wide their arms for Phil and Jade to come in to their family. I really love how our guys are being creative in outreaches. They're not like robots just handing out tracts or placing them in random spots, but they're really engaging, and they're doing it in a way that they're wired, how God's wired them, or maybe their interests. And so I shared a part of the story. I want to give you guys an update because it's really cool how it ends. But Greg, he's a physicist. He just got his PhD just recently, and he was asking the Lord, open up doors for me to talk about physics. I love the subject. Help me to meet physicists. Well, one of the days as he was praying, he saw an older woman pushing an older man in a wheelchair. And as they came up and they engaged, the wife, it was, I forgot her name, Miyoko. And she said, this is a famous physicist. This is a famous physicist. I mean, like, what are the chances of all that happening, right? I mean, just, it's amazing. Like all these stories this summer has been like that. And he's like, you got to know him. You got to know him. And so he I guess he wrote a book just recently. He's on Wikipedia. He's this famous, because they wanted to just fact check the whole thing and say like, okay, yeah, he actually is a famous physicist. So he invited, the couple invited Greg and some of the others over to the house. They had tea. They started talking about the gospel. They're non-practicing Buddhists, but the reality is they're open. And they had an open door just because of this prayer that God providentially opened the door for them to talk about physics, but also talk about the gospel. And then soon realized that the husband, the physicist, has a terminal cancer, blood cancer. And so they didn't know, he was supposed to actually die in the spring, but the Lord and his providence and his love allowed him to live this long. And then found out about a few weeks later he was hospitalized, and then the wife said unfortunately he passed away. Miyoko asked Faye and Tyler and Greg to come over to the house and just meet up. And so they got to bring flowers, they got to bring chocolate, and just sit there and open up about the gospel and how they've been comforted. And I don't know if you know Faye's story, but she had just recently lost her mother. She was adopted as a child from China, and so they were really close. And of course, this is the only parents you have, and so she lost her mom. But 2 Corinthians 1, it's a beautiful story, right? Where Paul's talking about the comfort that God gave me and gives you. You'll be able to use that comfort to comfort others. And so as she's sitting there in the living room, Miyoko says, "You're like a daughter to me." Just how sweet that is. And just backing up, I remember when we first got here, Faye was just opening up to Nicole and I as we're walking. The kids were far ahead of us, and we were just ministering to Faye, and she just pauses, breaks down and cries. I remember having umbrellas and just right in the middle, and people were skirting around us, and we just had this moment where we just hugged her as parents and just said, hey, you're in this family, you're loved and cared for. Little did she know that she'd be able to use the same comfort that we comforted her by God to comfort this poor widow who had lost her husband from a rare blood disease. And so just so thankful for that. The Bible's clear that we're to care for widows and orphans. We're to care for those who are hurting. God is near the brokenhearted. Not only that, if you thought that whole story was awesome, just towards the end here, as they're about to leave, and Miyoko's saying, hey, would you like some clothes for from my husband, because he's not going to need them anymore. So I want to get rid of those. And so Greg, who's actually interviewing at Kyoto University, which is so cool. Again, he's just using his gifts and has to give this physics talk at the university and doesn't have any clothes. He just brought summer clothes. And so he was going to go out and shop, but right there at the end, God provided for him. It reminds me again of Proverbs 11:25, right? Those who refresh others, they themselves will be refreshed. Well, as we close down Nehemiah this morning, it was just cool to see how God just providentially, as I was sharing with the group that, I didn't know what to preach on. I went through all these different books and read a lot, listened to things. I was like, nothing was coming. And I remember being right here in this place, and the kitchen table is right in front of me, and just thinking, after I read one of the devotions to one of my kids, it was Nehemiah 1. And I was like, that's it. That's what we're supposed to do. It was just as simple as that. And got before our people, started studying, got before our guys, and just said, hey, this is what God's doing. He's bringing us on a journey to rebuild the church here in Japan, but also he's rebuilding something unique and powerful to bring the harvest back at home. The first thing we learned, right, guys, is we learned the first things first, that Nehemiah was a man of prayer. He was on his knees in the beginning. He was on his knees in the end. We came here May 20th and we're leaving here July 10th, and that's exactly 52 days. And it says here in chapter 6, so the wall was completed in 52 days. And when the enemies heard it and the nations surrounding saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized the work had been accomplished with the help of our God. That's exactly what I remember the vision I told the guys in Nehemiah 2:8, that we're going to see God move. We're going to water, we're going to plant the seeds, we're going to water, and we're going to see God bring the growth and the harvest. And we've seen it with our own eyes, all the amazing things that God has done here. And we said that we'll be probably somewhere over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, just remembering all that God has done. And it's because the good hand of God was upon us. I can't help but think of Greg's story and all the other stories that we've heard over the last 6 weeks. That is because the good hand of God was upon us. The second thing was Nehemiah was a humble man. He was a man of prayer. He began with that. He ended with that. He began with humility. He ended with humility. He continued to keep his eyes on the Lord. He did not get angry at his enemies. He did not come after them, but he trusted God to vindicate. The third thing is he got vision from God. I want you guys to get vision this summer, for the rest of the summer and this fall. What is God speaking? How are you dreaming with God these days, and letting God stir your heart? And then the fourth thing was that he communicated and implemented the plan. It wasn't just a pipe dream. It wasn't just something that he dreamt with God and wrote it down, but he never actually accomplished it. He had a plan to do that, and then he brought people in on that plan. Please be bringing people in on it. Don't just keep it to yourself. Number 5 is to unify the people to run as a family in their gifting and lane. That we got that from chapter 3. And then number 6, that there's going to be opposition, but he overcame opposition from the outside. This was the ridicule. The 7th one was that he was able as a leader to press pause and deal with the opposition that was happening on the inside. Number 8, he asked God for wisdom, discernment, and courage for personal attacks, intimidation, and distractions. He was a man who had a vision. He was a man who had laser-like focus and was able to say no to things that were less than and would not accomplish his plan, but also he would not allow the enemies from the outside nor the inside disrupt the plan of God. Number 9, celebrate the victory. We had a big celebration yesterday. We're going to have another one tomorrow. It's just who we are. It's who God's called us to be. Nehemiah 8 says, the joy of the Lord is our strength, and to celebrate all that God has done. And number 10, and final, it's after the walls were built, what was the first thing that they did? You guys know? You remember reading this book? It's amazing. He just got on his knees. They opened up the Bible and they worshiped God. They prayed. Nehemiah started with prayer before this is even a dream in a reality. And then on the back end of that, sometimes it's so easy after to see victory. It's easy to just go back to normal and just take advantage of the fact that all that God has done. But just take a moment and pause and thank God for all that he's done. Take a moment for that he's, if you're on the Belize trip, or you're on the Colombia trip, or you're on Italy or Portugal or Japan, just thank God. If you're on the Impact team and you just came home, or you're Mike Pavone, just came home, and just thank the Lord for all that he's done around the world. I mean, guys, 5 locations around the world, plus Orlando, and all the people that are coming to church from college ministry and the college outreach events and city outreach events. It's incredible. God is producing in us a wineskin that will hold the new wine that's coming this fall. There's coming a harvest, and let's prepare for it. Let's be humble. Let's be prayerful. Let's rely on the Spirit of God, and let's confess our sins. Let's get right with Him. That's the new wineskin, because if He pours new wine in this old wineskin, then it's going to burst and we'll lose everything that God has taught us this summer. And so lastly, take ownership and live out the vision that God's called us to live as a family on mission.